Welcome back to another Reading and Correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. And if you are looking to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 92 of The Captain's Heart. Lodging is still vacant. The captain's announcement came. Hope is still there. That won't be the case for long. It's been brought to my attention that new food have been realized. Congratulations on giving are given to those responsible. Jeremy kept himself from paying too close attention to what was said to keep the programming from noticing it. He focused on adjusting the weight machine's new sensors. If he could get them calibrated, he hoped they could be programmed to scan him as he worked and adjust the weight for the workout he wanted without having to rely on his flawed expectations of what he was capable of handling. You'd have to get medical's help with that, but it should be doable without having one of them show up, or worse, having to brave the ship's corridor. I don't think I can do this, he said, looking at the door. I'll escort you to your apartment then, the psychologist said. He glared at her. Aren't you supposed to be pushing me to deal with that stuff? He knew his anger was misdirected, but the door didn't care while she'd react in some way. She rolled her eyes at him. Ah, yes, because you two have some misconception of what my role here is. Me too? She nodded. I'll support you. I'll be here to help you if things don't go well, but the decision has to be yours. She motioned to the door. You have to be the one to decide you are ready to face what's behind it. Fuck being ready. He stepped to the door and slammed a hand on the blue button. The blue open button. It obeyed, and he froze on seeing them standing on the other end of the room. Them, his agents, the program told them. They're to do what he instructed to him. Since he resisted the call, he barely noticed her reach past him to tap the door control as he wrestled for his mind. They weren't here because he'd told them. Jeremy had arranged it for his friends to be here. He had messaged each of them individually and asked for their help in the next part of his treatment, learning to be among these hated creatures again. To be with his friends, he told the programming. If it wasn't for it, he'd be comfortable with the idea of stepping into that room. But he was doing it that it wanted him or not. No, he was doing it because it didn't want him to. He stepped across the threshold, distracting himself from the mounting discomfort by working out why the door had remained open all this time. It didn't know he was there. They usually closed after a few seconds, even if he didn't tap the... That was what she'd done. Locked the door into in its open mode. Hi, Tora greeted him, not moving from the other side of the room. The word had Jeremy clamped down on the urge to run away, to flee to the safety of his quarters, where they never get to him. Like that door would stop them if they decided they wanted in. Atarikna, by herself, could probably cut it out of the frame with what she had on her. Flee, the programming demanded. Flee the ship, flee back to Earth, where they'll accept him as he is. Where they'll accept him as he... Okay, this needs to be capitalized. Flee. The programming demanded. Flee the ship. Flee back to Earth, where they'll accept him as he is, where they'll see to it he gets better, where he will be kept safe. He snorted and was aware of the exchange looks. Humans didn't have his safety in mind, his happiness. He didn't understand why him being different scared them so much. He wasn't the only one, after all, the way he initially thought. There had been at least one other back on that station. They hadn't said it, but it had been there. Exchanged looks among things almost said. Hi, he finally replied and gave a wave for good measure. I'm glad you all agreed to come. I'm sorry if I'm a nervous wreck right now. It's all right, Daniel said. We'll keep our distances. Fuck that. He stepped towards them, his friends. those who had made his stay here easier just by being around him, reminding him that while he was the only human on the ship, he wasn't alone. His step faltered halfway to them. The programming clamored they lied. They weren't his friend, they were his enemies. They wanted to twist him into a version that was wrong, that would want him to have his way, crave him. He couldn't actively think about how he'd already wanted that, so he focused on contradicting the programming. They weren't there for him. He barely knew any of them. He barely knew any of them existed. The only two, no, three. The programming almost won on noticing the one person he hadn't invited. He swallowed. What was the engineer doing here? Which of his supposedly friends had told him about it, brought him? He was the agent, the programming proclaimed. The others were safe, but he was a danger. He was close to the enemy, a friend of him. Run. Fuck no. Xeniel knew him, but they were antagonistic. He'd often said how the quartermaster seemed to plot with their goddess of madness. But the engineer? Run. I fucking told you now. Shut up about that already. Engineer, what are you doing here? I raised that eyebrow at Tilted Ear. Really? You have to ask? He's been asking how you were doing every time I arrived for my shift, Prateros said. A look of disbelief. A glare directed at his friend. Then the expression was stern, arms crossed over his chest. Well, when are you coming back to work? Except that was concern in the tilt of the ear. Was that concern in the tilt of the ear? Not the annoyance of a boss asking after someone working under him. But that would mean he thought they were... How may I address you? Jeremy asked. Another raised eyebrow tilted ear again, but he didn't voice the sentiment this time. Outside of engineering, you can address me as Alexiana Karan Debaran. The eyes narrowed, a warning against ever thinking of addressing him such within engineering. Thank you, Alexiana Karan Debaran. You can address me as Jeremy Bradshaw. Alexiana Karan threw his arm up. Really? What did you think I was going to call you? He froze. Jeremy realized he had backed up at the outburst. I apologize, Jeremy Bradshaw. I didn't intend to scare you. Oh, no intention was ever needed, Turek said under his breath. What was that, technician? Nothing, engineer. I have a rule, Jeremy said, worried this might escalate and send him running. They looked at him, and he didn't understand why. They're waiting for you to establish that rule, the psychologist said softly. Right. He took a breath. Since it's supposed to be only my friends in this room, there aren't going to be any titles when you are with me as friends. Alexiana Karan de Baron narrowed his eyes. Yes, that means you too. I'm not going to have my friends asserting ranks around me. I'm not saying you have to be friends with the rest of the rest of the time, but you'll act like you are around me. The engineer looked at the others as if he was judging them. Xeniel snorted. Don't even try to act like we haven't fucked. That doesn't make us friend, Xenial. But my short name does. Fine, he said, as if it was the most difficult decision he could make. But don't one of you think I'll treat them differently when you're in engineering? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the psychologist smile, which meant that learning to keep thoughts from the programming had also taught him not to project. That goes for you too, psychologist. Yes, I've got... She stared at him. You've helped me this far. I think we've moved past needing titles. How may I address you? She searched his face while he knew. She searched his face. Okay, this is a different... While he knew he couldn't sense her poking in his head, he figured she was double-checking his intention. His intention. You may address me as Leah Tergrobar, she said finally, at least when you aren't seeing me as a patient. He nodded and steeled himself to catch up with his friends in person. She laughed at me, he typed. Here I am, unburdening myself about how I am a failure for not managing to reach engineering, and she laughed. Yes, she has shown a surprisingly lack of professionalism with me too a few times. He actively didn't think with whom he was having the typed conversation. Just one of his friends as far as the programming was concerned. Are you looking forward to being on the planet? No, it's going to be work nearly the entire time. My parents are on the night side from where I'll be, and they'll be sleeping still by the time I'm back on the ship. You could take time to go see them, you know. I'm pretty sure they aren't going to be anywhere near anytime. Pretty sure we aren't going to be needed anytime soon. The longer I'm on the planet, the more chances trouble might find me. The people interested don't always play fair. I should at least get to know them. You should at least let them know that you're here. They should get to decide if you're worth making time to see. I will. But they are both busy people. Mother is the anthropologist for a learning center. Father's forester for the district. I expect they'll message me and hope things go well during the meeting, and that's all. Still, give them the choice. He wished he could make the severity noticeable in writing. If he had a chance to visit his parents, he wouldn't hesitate. Or would he? He tried to work out if this was the programming, or if he'd somehow come to terms with what they had done to him. The programming didn't give his opinion. It wasn't as loud as it had been, which had led to Jeremy forgetting it was there a time or two and sending himself into a panic spiral when he thought of him as anything other than a threat that had taken work to get himself out of. But his life was getting back to some sort of normalcy. Once he was able to get back to work, it would be good as he could manage at the moment. He stood at the threshold, looking in at them, working. Not them. They were no longer enemies, just Kelsirians going about their work, which made his discomfort worrisome. If this wasn't the programming, why wasn't he stepping in and going back to work? For months now, this was one of the two things he'd been working towards. And here it was. So why wasn't he going in? Aldebaran pulled himself out from the open panel in the reactor and looked at the circuit in the light. He reached back, pulled the tool bag out, and stood. A few taps on the console, checking readouts, more taps, a nod, and he put the panel cover back in place. He turned and looked at Jeremy. Well, he demanded, are you going to stand there all shift long? Our shift, or are you finally going to start working? There's a console over there that's been waiting for you longer than it has any business to. Yes, of course, engineer. He entered engineering and headed for the console he'd been directed to. Well, Proteros said. If it isn't the engineer's favorite technician, finally back to work. Finally, Turek said from the other console. He'll be able to distract him so we don't have to work so hard anymore. You two know I can leave and claim to still be scared of all of you, right? And you three know I can see you're not working. The engineer called. Shift's not over. Get to it, or demand to be transferred to another ship. Nope. Him getting back isn't going to make our lives any easier, Bertiro said. Jeremy set to work, grinning. And this concludes chapter 92 of The Captain's Heart. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter will be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read this story, it is available on Ream Story. And if you are looking to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch and YouTube. Links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.